When Erik van den Berg married an MBA to his master's degree in chemistry, he did so with intentionality. While still a student, he'd straddled the line between science and the life science business, and he liked it. He liked the dichotomies, the contrasts, and even the occasional chaos. He still likes all that, and he's been navigating the chaos for nearly 30 years, starting out in management consulting with Arthur D. Little, an international management consulting firm that was founded by, you guessed it, and perhaps ironically, a chemist. From there, Erik moved to industry, working in business development for Isotis Orthobiologics and then Organon before joining the boards of Holland Bio and Lead Pharma, co-founding Heat Matrix Group and Lava Therapeutics. He's now chairman of the boards of Step Pharma, Tridec One, and Target Biopharmaceuticals, and a board member of AM Pharma, where he was previously CEO and chief business officer before that. Late last year, Erik became CEO at Memo Therapeutics, a developer of antiviral and anti-cancer monoclonal antibodies. Along the way, Erik has secured more than $500 million in financing deals for those early stage companies and tallied well over $1 billion in transactions, licensing, and partnership deals. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech. And on today's show, we're getting into the intentional embrace of chaos with Memo Therapeutics CEO, Erik van den Berg. Erik, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the invitation. And thanks for that introduction as well. Pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you. As I rattled off in the prologue there, you've been a biotech builder for quite some time. And these experiences that you've gathered along the way, as I said, look to be intentionally curated from the outset, from my perspective anyway. So I was hoping we could start out by walking through some of the building blocks that you've sort of intentionally placed along the journey. Things like, your MBA, some of the early influences during your student life, and how that kind of formed up.
Well, pleasure to start there, Matt. Maybe it looks intentionally, but definitely it was not plotted out in this way when you start out working or even studying. But already during my student years, indeed, I focused on, combining science and business. So I studied both chemistry as well as business science, and later indeed on did my MBA, the business internship in Australia. So I already knew that I wanted to work beyond, say, the lab in the chemical lab. So I started my career indeed as a consultant because I thought that's, a nice broad way to start getting experience, do 3 or 4 months assignments in different industries, different settings, strategy, or more HR, or business process redesign, or innovation and R&D management. Mm-hmm. And in that process, I found out that that innovation side, the management of that was most interested to me. And it's also the first time that I encountered the biotech industry.
Yeah.
And
did you know, Erik, let me interrupt you real quick. Did you know that Arthur D. Little was a chemist? He was a trained chemist, the guy that founded
I probably knew at one point in time, but I didn't know anymore. So thanks for remembering me indeed.
It's pretty wild. Yeah. The Arthur D. Little was founded like in the late 1800s, early 1900s by Arthur D. Little. And he was a chemist. So you've got that in common with the man.
Yeah. It started also as more like an innovation center so it was labs where they basically invented products and got tasked from industry to work on stuff like new fuel cells and stuff like that. And then later on, what was added was indeed the management consulting business. Yeah, that was the part actually where I worked in. But the heritage was still there from R&D and innovation management. So the company in the 90s published books on how to do that, how to become a product juggernaut, or how to do fourth generation R&D management and stuff like that. Yeah. There were these gurus in-house that taught us youngsters on those methodologies. And you were exposed then to, of course, leaders in the industry, either chemical or pharma industry, on that part. And this is also why, for example, we did an assignment at a certain moment in time for a university in the Netherlands that wanted to do something in biotech, but it didn't have anything in its curriculum for its students to do biotech education. Mm-hmm. So it was a classical strategy evaluation where we looked at, okay, what is a market need? What is your competition doing? Where do you excel in from a competence perspective? So then what would be a logical fit to offer as a added value to students? So that's when I visited all biotech companies in the Netherlands, where were not that many at that time. And then eventually started to join one, being Isotus, that you have introduced as a business developer, basically being involved with lots of different stuff, licensing agreements, also the IPO process and a merger process with a Swiss company, managing part of the R&D. So that was a very nice and broad experience, late 90s, early 2000s, benefiting from the boom at that point in time when going public in 2000.
Yeah.
Which was basically at the end of the cycle. So when we went public, our book emptied of the subscribed investors with interest. We were just able to close and float the company and progress its R&D.
Yeah.
Eventually, the company was sold. But the constant factor, the constant factor, at least on that journey, was, I guess I like challenges, learning, building teams, achieving results. So that has been more the constant thread through my career. So maybe it looks intentionally, in hindsight, it was definitely plotted out as an intentional course.
Yeah. You did mention to me the last time we spoke that your quote unquote board experience started as a student, and surely that had to influence you. Tell us a little bit about that. You served on some sort of a board as a student that had to have given you at least a taste of that fueled the flames a bit.
Yeah. Well, that's indeed. So yeah, it was like a union of students of about 1,000 students that come together, and they need to be managed in all the day-to-day activities, financing, etc. So as part, indeed, during my study, I stopped studying for a year to manage that part. They had 3 buildings under management. It was probably about, at that time, I guess about €1 million in, revenues that came in and needed to be managed, and lots of activities that were organized. So lots of different groups that need to be coordinated to have those activities indeed performed. I was more on the commercial side of those activities, so how to get external money into that union of students supporting the activities and the representation. So I was more on the outside of the union, which was a lot of fun to do. It definitely helped indeed in the personal development.
It seems like
how to manage larger groups of people, for example.
Yeah, it seems like early experiences like that would certainly seed the desire to exercise those muscles down the road in your career.
Also the internship in Australia really helped. Far from home, being in a business environment in a different culture, having an assignment that needed to be finished in 3 months. Maybe that was a good step up towards the consulting life, indeed, where you basically finish and start a new project within 3 months or 4 months.
Right.
You have to be the expert and have to know a bit more than your customer.
Yeah.
So it was always a very fast learning course, because you had to stay ahead of your customer, and they, of course, are better subject matter experts than we were. We just had good methodologies, clear thinking, and then an outside view in, gathering information, making information transparent so that everybody has the same set of assumptions, or at least the same set of data and facts in front of them before further decisions were made. I think that was what the added value that consultants could provide to companies.
And how have you extrapolated that learning in your professional life beyond consultancy, in your biotech building life? Like, do you find yourself leaning into sort of that philosophy?
I still have a very analytical approach to things. So I like to know, what are the universe of companies that you need to get in touch with, right? If you have an approach for business development, what would be the reasons that they could be interested? And then how do you play to that? And the same goes for investors, for example. And also in discussions with teams, for example, on development questions, I think it's very helpful to know what the facts are and what opinions are, so
Mhm.
that we put them on the table and then have a factual discussion on it so that we take the best decisions possible with everybody informed on the same information level, knowing what risks you take, because in biotech, you always have to take decisions in the absence of data. There's never enough, but you have to make strides forward, not to lose a lot of time. But at least it's clear what the facts are and opinions so that you can move forward from there. So those are things I've taken along, probably besides, being able to make fancy PowerPoints.
uh, Making fact-based decisions in times of chaos. I mean, it only becomes more important in times of chaos. And chaos might be an awfully strong word, but it's clickbait, right? So we're going to stick with it. But
we'll get to it. Yeah.
over the course of your career, I mean, to your point, you went public with the company in 2020, and then everything changed. Then there was COVID, and then everything changed again. And then shortly on the heels of COVID, everything changed again when the money dried up. Now, like here in the States, we find ourselves in a political a chaotic political scene that's having influence on biotech here in the States. So the chaos is a constant, that at least uncertainty and dealing with outside forces, it's a constant. So I'm hoping we can maybe talk about some of your experiences and perhaps the way that you've leaned into your, fact-based decision-making mantra as you've faced down some of these chaotic outside influences, I guess.
Happy to do that.
Yeah. I thought we'd start with, I'm gonna rewind the clock here. There was a period of time pre-COVID that I think a lot of industry observers saw as problematic because it was gluttonous in terms of the money available to biotech builders. There are quite a few talking heads who said, this is a problem, while everyone was enjoying the freedom, the free flow of money that was going on. So that's chaotic. I mean, from some perspectives, it may be chaotic in a good way, but it's chaotic nonetheless. Tell us a little bit about your experience during that time, and particularly how you lean into your management philosophies to exercise some pragmatism and discernment when, capital is probably available everywhere you look.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was maybe even more so during COVID, right? Which was really the heydays when lots of money was available.
Mm-hmm.
I love that, right? Because it gives them plenty of opportunities to develop multiple products in parallel. And I must say, it was from a innovation timeframe, of course, a unique opportunity. If you think through it again, that in 9 months from start of knowing your antigen to having a vaccine available to roll out on a global scale, the human ingenuity basically that had to go to play, and the project management capabilities to manage these billions of investments with all sorts of parallel activities around the globe. That was a tremendous task.
Yeah.
We maybe already have forgotten about it. But I think that is basically what innovation can do. So when there is sufficient money available, I basically always believe in capital efficiency. What it will allow, of course, to do is pursue multiple compounds in parallel. And sometimes that's needed to mature a new technology. So for example, in an oncology company, if you can have from a platform 4 programs developed, you're pretty sure that probably one of them will be successful, but you're also pretty sure that probably half of them won't be successful, mm-hmm. which is, of course, then riskier if there's less money available and you have to make a bet on what is the compound to take forward. What we did with, for example, in Memo Therapeutics that I helped, that I co-founded, is I think we founded that in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, with our first financing round. And then we took it public in 2021 on the NASDAQ, bring 2 programs into the clinic in the same year. So that has been a really fast development of assets. So being able to do every year a large financing round, stepping up towards an IPO, I think was critical, be able to, accelerate in that amount of speed, which of course changed then again when the climate, deteriorated, when the financial climate. And at that moment in time, at the board, we had this discussions around, instead of doing lots of activities in parallel so that you planned for the shortest route to BLA, we had, of course, to pace our investments because the investment climate was changing and we didn't know when and where there was access again to new capital. So that changes what you do in parallel, which might, of course, then increase the time to get your medicine to patients, which is, of course, not the best, but it's the reality. And secondly, of course, is what do you do in-house and what do you do in partnerships? So Memo Therapeutics, in the end, we had 2 partnerships in place, one with Janssen, the J&J pharma subsidiary that we had early on. And then later on, the company did a deal with Seagen, which was acquired by Pfizer thereafter. But then you can leverage, of course, the capital of another partner to do the clinical studies, which are expensive costs that you can then avoid, whilst it brings in an upfront as well, which extends the runway of a company. So those were choices that we made within Memo Therapeutics at that time. Other example, maybe with AM Pharma, where I was CEO at the time, we did an early deal with Pfizer after phase 1, ahead of phase 2 data, which was an option deal, $87.5 million upfront, and then $600 million total deal, with the intention that Pfizer would prepare for a seamless execution of the phase 3 after we finish phase 2. And there's already quite a bit of manufacturing activities, for example, that you need to invest in before you can enter into phase 3 activities. So that deal allowed us to accelerate potential development through phase 3 without spending that type of money, whilst preparing for phase 3 and hand over then to Pfizer. Well, it didn't happen at the time, so they did not exercise their option, which is, of course, fair, that more than half of the option deals are not exercised. Mm-hmm. So we built it already into the contract that we managed this clinical study. We retained all the manufacturing data that they provided so that we could seamlessly progress ourselves with the phase 3. The only caveat was we now needed to raise the money for a phase 3, which was a 1,600 patient study that we eventually run in across 4 continents. So that was quite an endeavor, which was also, by the way, during COVID. So we raised the money prior to COVID in July 2019. Mm-hmm. And then we already had to pivot. So we didn't submit yet our phase 3 protocol yet to the authorities. But then COVID came along. And our product was to be tested in the intensive care units for patients that have an infection, sepsis, and acute kidney injury. And we wanted to treat that acute kidney injury part. Well, in COVID time, of course, you had lots of patients on the ICU with an infection, but not being flu this time, but COVID. Yeah. And then, of course, also had organ failures like kidney failure that we were treating. But we had no experience in that patient population because the phase 2 was done prior to COVID. Mm-hmm. So we needed to quickly adapt there in our plans. So we analyzed the situation and decided to exclude the COVID-19 patients from the main trial population because we had no previous experience in it, but still include these patients because the drug might be helpful in protecting the kidney also in these patients. So we included these patients in a specific cohort to evaluate the effect of our drug. Yeah. And which in the end, it was a small group of COVID patients included, but there seemed to be a tremendous lowering of mortality in that subgroup. Yeah. That was the reason to try it.
Yeah, you're getting ahead of me because the pandemic was the next point of chaos I wanted to dig into. So we're going to revisit that, but I've got a follow up for you before we move on around your comments on the fact that during the glut of money and that was happening just prior to and during COVID, there was also a corresponding glut of innovation. I mean, there was all sorts of innovation, and their innovation remains. With so much money, floating around all at once, and so much innovation happening at the same time, what are your thoughts on why so many of those startup companies, startup biotechs who were well heeled with cash leading into and during COVID have struggled or outright failed since? I mean, I
Yeah.
know that there are, there are several, several, you could go along on, case studies on failed companies, but I'm curious, I guess just philosophically or generally, what your take is on like, what went wrong? You had all this money, you had a great scientific principle.
Yeah. Well, I think in general, it always takes a bit longer and it costs more money to get innovation to a state that you can really claim success. And
Mm,
there are, of course, the rare successes that, had flawless execution. And part of that is also luck. I think, you can plan for luck a bit. You can try to shape the conditions that luck appears, maybe more frequently. And then if you recognize it as a leader, you can bank on that luck.
mhm.
But in general, yeah, it's not atypical that clinical studies take longer to execute, definitely during COVID and definitely thereafter, certainly in the US. So somehow, resources disappeared, focused on clinical trials disappeared, became also much more expensive. So I think those are all factors that don't help, because if it costs more and it takes longer, you run out of cash if you have a large organization and a large burn rate. And I think that is basically where maybe companies have not adapted quickly enough to the new reality to say, well, we need to stretch money because we don't know when there's capital available anymore, and stuck too long to the original plan, which was the plan that was successful in the past and raised a lot of capital.
Yeah.
And of course, provides a lot of chances. But yeah, it's very difficult to run a candy store, basically, of many different things. So focus, I think, in the end, is a critical success factor. And yeah, maintaining that focus with agile teams, I think that is a key part of the success of biotech. How I see it.
Yeah. You started to get into the COVID story with AM, and I'm wondering what else you can share about other aspects, I guess, that were affected by the pandemic that you had to manage through during that time. I mean, patient access and the decisions you made around who you would treat and how you would treat them in that clinical trial in terms of putting them in their own cohort. That was a great example. What else though? Like what else? Things like supply chains. That were certainly crunched and remain in some cases. In
Yeah.
in a state of flux. Now, what other factors did COVID put in front of you that you needed to manage your way through?
I think on the clinical execution of the flexibility was a key part, and I think that is maintained in the execution of clinical studies. But for example, you had to have remote monitoring. You were not allowed to go into hospitals at that point in time and do site visits. So setting up the flexibility around management of the trial to be able to do that, home visits, for example, is something I think that is there now to stay. In the supply, well, another example maybe on the clinical side is that we set up a studio and did our investigator meetings live. We presented not from our desk, but from a studio, like what you would do in a meeting room. And then gathered the audience with lots of multiple voting optionalities to engage the audience as much as possible in a remote way.
Yeah.
So those were things to be invented. Yeah, on the supply chain, it was just unpredictable. So I think the effect was it became more expensive, but also it was longer to procure materials. So instead of typically saying in manufacturing within half a year you should be able to get everything in, I think nowadays suppliers, CDMOs, analyze what are the critical long lead time materials, which probably have to be ordered in 12 months or 9 months, at least in advance, to make sure that you don't have delays in starting up your trial for your manufacturing campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those were things that the company had to deal with. And we were on it. And still there are some remnants of that indeed in the supply chain, that it can still take, these 9 or 12 months on long lead time items where prior to that, it basically was not the case.
Are there other things that you gave great examples around lead times and cash management, sort of frugality, stretching the dollar, so to speak, that were sort of reactive to that time period. Were there other things that you learned during that time that have stuck in terms of the way that you manage cash and people and clinical trials?
I think from the people side, definitely. So at AM Pharma, what we implemented. So when we set out to rebuild the organization to do phase 3 and commercial transition to commercial is, building a large hub in the Netherlands. We recruited people from the US indeed to the Netherlands, and I wanted to build a tightly knit culture around a single center where everybody had to come in the head office before we would, spread out and maybe get local operations. Well, then COVID came along, so there was no office, and it turned out that a team is very well manageable at a remote basis. So we changed our hiring policy, and we just said we want the best person, and it doesn't really matter where the location is. So we had people scattered in, the US, across Europe, and still a relatively modest team eventually of 35 people. And it worked fine. So I think there needs to be a strong company culture that needs to be shared. There has to be sufficient, of course, face-to-face time opportunities. So going back to the mothership frequently to engage with the team or sub-teams is important. Organizing your offsites is important. But I think, articulating a concrete, explicit culture that is carried by everybody, where collaboration, for example, and accountability are typically important ingredients of, I think is pivotal. And then it really doesn't matter that not everybody is at the same time at the same moment. So we share information, and we're doing that again now at Memo Therapeutics. So we have people in the US now, across Europe, built a great culture. We've expanded the team, not doubled yet, but almost doubled since when I joined about 8 months ago. But yeah, it works. If there's a collaborative spirit and a strong corporate culture, a willingness to share and help each other, it works. And I think that is really my key learning from COVID. And I see that now being applied across many different biotechs, also the ones that I'm on the board.
Yeah.
So that's a new way of working, and that's definitely there to stay.
How do you pressure test the I guess work ethic and collaborative wherewithal of people that you may be bringing on board? How do you know? How do I know that Erik Vandenberg, although he's in the Netherlands and I can't watch him sit at his desk and do his work all day? How do I know that he's not going to walk his dog and, take his kids on picnics and do things like that when I really need him to be doing important work and sharing it with the team?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, it's an interesting, how do you, it's a character assessment, but it's got to be a challenge.
It's a character assessment. At the same time, I think it's a false control prerogative that you think if people come to the office, they are productive for the 9 hours that they stare into, a TV screen.
True.
Yeah. So at least the biotechs that I have experience in, the teams are always small. So if somebody is not contributing to what the tasks are that the person is responsible for, you'll know.
Yeah,
right?
It's glaring.
Because you miss deadlines. The quality is not there of documents that you're reviewing. You're in pitch situations together. So it's kind of obvious. You just need to stay switched on. And is somebody still contributing or is somebody hiding? And that's why I still like to have, for example, frequent moments with the team, also face to face, because sometimes, of course, body language speaks more than what you would get from either a Zoom call like this. So I think that's still information that you need to complete the picture, and to have these face to face discussions or dinner together, etc. But yeah, I don't feel the need to control people on a day-to-day activity. We'll make agreements on what the expectations are, what needs to be delivered when. We agree on how things will be done. And then we evaluate what the result is. And that is a feedback loop. So I think that's probably the way people like to work, where there is responsibility. So when you hire people, because that was part of your question, so how do you know? Yes, character traits are, I guess, important. If somebody can be independent, a self-starter, I think that's important. Part of that is also baked into experience. So it's It's really difficult if somebody comes from large pharma and didn't have any prior biotech experience and then starts in biotech.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite a change.
Yeah.
The way of working is really different because we don't have a gazillion, experts or support groups supporting your activities. You have to do it yourself. You have to be productive yourself and be, forthcoming and engage with the team. So I typically like profiles that have had both that large pharma as biotech experience for the senior roles. And of course, for the more junior roles, it's really about the learning capacity. So does somebody have the potential to grow in his or her role? So those are key factors for evaluation at the beginning.
Yeah.
And as soon as you feel that you don't trust anybody, right? So if that's already there, then don't do it. Don't give somebody the advantage of the doubt there, just because you put somebody already at a bad start from the beginning. So you need to be very enthusiastic of the people that you hire.
Yeah. Very good. All right. So we're going to move on to another point of chaos. We're kind of working on on a chronological continuum here. Post-COVID, money just went away. All that gluttony was, people were left hungry because the money dried up in a hurry. You've ascertained that you've done a good job with multiple companies obviating for that, preserving cash, stretching the dollar, but still, it creates a moment of, the necessity for some management finesse to see that coming, make sure that you're going to be able to keep the lights on and the paychecks rolling indefinitely, not knowing when the market's going to come back. So tell us a little bit about that. How have you gone about being good at, still placing good bets and still maintaining the course when money is not as readily available as it once was?
Yeah, it's true. It's more difficult to raise funding currently. Certainly doing IPOs is not really back to its normal. I think you see that investors place their bets on the winners, kind of the winner takes it all strategy, certainly in the public market. The private market, it depends on where you are. Europe, it was still pretty well until recently, I think. You see more larger rounds being done, of course, early on. So setting up companies for success. I think what I'll come back to a point that I already mentioned. I think focus is still very important. So maybe the example of the company that I currently work on with Memo Therapeutics. So we have one program in the clinic that we need to make sure is successful. So what we've done in the last half year is extended the financing round. So we were able to raise further funding. Total C round was 45 million Swiss francs to really do a robust phase 2 study with an antibody that addresses the BK virus in a kidney transplantation setting. So that's a virus that we all carry, but if you're on strong immunosuppressions, you get opportunistic infections, which basically then destroys the kidney because that's where the cells reside. So addressing it is really important, and currently there's nothing out there. So we wanted to make sure that we had the money to address that. So focusing on that trial, analyzing, for example, the powering of the study, what were the regulatory feedback, so that we really place the company in the best position to have the maximum chance to address the potential risks that we see, but also address the questions that the regulators have, including now also involving the potential commercial questions. What is important for payers, what's important for patients and as for physicians. So those are things that we're all accelerated and took on board with a real focus to, once we have the data, we should be able to accelerate quickly into phase 3. At the same time, we had a discovery platform of different programs that were ongoing. We probably had about 4 programs ongoing. Mm-hmm. And together with the team, we decided to really focus that only in one area. So that's we support, of course, the BK program that's in the clinic. But the other activity that we now do is evaluate the TLS biology, I like to call it, so tertiary lymphoid structures, which are predictive for good outcome in solid tumor cancers. And that is basically now more and more explored in the last 5 or 6 years. But what are these tertiary lymphostructures doing? Well, they're maturing B cells to produce certain antibodies that apparently are very effective in addressing the tumors and its metastasis. So our technology can identify these antibodies and then identify the targets that they're addressing. And in that way, we might be able to find new antibody or new epitopes for new targets or existing targets and directly move that into the clinic. So that focusing, I think, of the discovery, not doing too much in parallel, but concentrating your efforts on what you think delivers has the highest chance to deliver results on the shortest time frame, and with that being the cheapest, I think is something that we at least took to heart within Memo Therapeutics. But I already gave you the example on Lava Therapeutics, where we said, okay, so we're going to partly, of course, partner a platform of clinical stage assets because you cannot carry multiple clinical stage assets forward if your budget is limited, because you burn very quickly throughout your money.
Yeah. You've had a lot of experience raising money and maintaining financing with multiple companies. So you've got good perspective on the application of that focus to the investor market, to the capital markets, right? Like I think, right, like given your experience, I think it's safe for me to assume that if your company was focused, as you said, is so important, but the focus was on something that perhaps wasn't palatable or isn't palatable to sustenance from the greater market, you'd know it and you would correct course. I mean, that's a general safe assumption. So that leads to the question I would ask you, and that is to share, I guess, some perspective on the hallmarks of knowing that what you're focused on is going to be palatable to the investment community, or perhaps the big pharma might have an interest in that. Like there's something transactable down the road, because I think it's fairly common for especially science-based founders to get swept up in the science and perhaps lose sight of the market. So just some thoughts around like what are the boxes you check to ensure that what your team is heads down and sleeves rolled up working on is going to be received well?
A pivotal question. Thank you for that. And maybe to stereotype a little bit, but where in research you might go from hypothesis to hypothesis and do an experiment and then plot your way and find out where you are, and then we'll solve other problems later. Mm-hmm. I think in a development setting and for successful companies, you have to start with the end in mind. What do we need to have in the end to have a package that can convince the regulators, investors, pharma partners that this is attractive and valuable? So you have to have a sense of what that is that you need to deliver. So for example, in Memo Therapeutics, we of course need to have great phase 2 data, and we need to have an agreed plan with the authorities on what the phase 3 will look like. Because it's a novel indication, the development path is unknown. What is the endpoint that you need to choose for phase 3? And there are many examples of that, of course, in biotech, where those are uncertainties until you walk the path. But you cannot plan ahead for that. So if you know that you need to have a robust end of phase 2 meeting, then, okay, what is the data that I need to bring to that meeting to be successful? And then you can think back, okay, but how do we get there? What can we build into the trial? What do we do separately? Maybe as from registry analysis. What do we do preclinically to support the story there? And then what I personally very much like to do is to interact with pharma, because each pharma, again, is different because there are different people working in these companies and they have different strategies. So you get different answers, what they find important for them to transact. And for some, it's indeed more the commercial case. And for others, it might be a distribution of a molecule and so forth and so further. And being able to make then the data package addressing these answers, increasing your chance that you will, fund the company further or transact at that moment in time. I think those are important factors to take in. So really begin with the end in mind and then work back.
Yeah. And know it sounds like know your audience too, right? Like know your audience. And yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't know them, get to know them, right? Yeah. It's free consulting advice. Pharma companies in the end mostly are the customers of biotech. We sell the biotech or the product to a pharma. That's where, say, 80%, 90% of the companies end up somewhere in their life. So it's good to know your customer.
Mm-hmm. All right. So another, I guess, constant of late anyway, source of chaos would be the biopharmaceutical market itself. Like, if you look around, I mean, monoclonal antibodies remain sort of a bulwark of the biologics development space. So there's a clamor for attention among monoclonal antibody developers. You look outside MABs and you see just a whole new world of multiple new worlds of modalities popping up all the time. Perhaps some of those modalities are chasing the same, kidney transplant indication that you're chasing. So you've maybe got competition coming at you from angles that are well outside the, antibody space. And to the point you made earlier, I mean, innovation is happening at breakneck speed. It's always, you always question yourself. You want to check yourself when you say innovation is happening at a pace we've never seen before. But I think you can say that right now. I think it's true. New biologic discoveries. So the question is when things are good, money's good, your prospects for partnership are good. Everything's good, but you look around, you go, holy cow, it's a chaotic market. There's a lot going on in a lot of different modalities. How do you go about managing that and being aware, like maintaining awareness? Because it's got to be a combination of knowing your competition, your co-opetition, your peers, but also operating at least in some perspectives with blinders on so that you maintain focus. What's the secret sauce there?
Well, I don't know if I know the secret sauce, but they're definitely there definitely trends, I think, where, if you go maybe back 20 years, indeed, things were maybe a bit more clear, right? You have your small molecules, you have your antibodies, and then there are maybe, some early gene therapies in development. That was kind of it. And then later on, it is indeed what you say, it exploded from a modality perspective. Mm-hmm. Not all sorts of different modalities, but even within the antibody space, right? So if you think about all the different modalities that we now have available there, it's tremendously interesting. And hopefully AI will provide us with some insights there to make early on sensible decisions. So that's another layer on top of that we currently have to deal with. I think one thing that I can offer here is that I don't think we should solve a problem adding new technologies to solve it just because of a new technology. So sometimes you see that you have already a new target that you're addressing, mm-hmm. and then if it requires 3 new technologies to be added into one solution to be able to be successful, that is typically a recipe for not being successful. So keep it simple is probably a right advice there. And if you take that to heart, you might be able to challenge yourself and restrict, say, solving a novel problem of a novel technology with a novel technology, but then maybe take a step back and say, okay, well, is this fundamentally the right way to do it, or should we approach it in a different way? So I think that's there. Something else, very basic, more from a management philosophy, also just introduced at Memo Therapeutics, is a stage gate model. So, again, begin with the end in mind, but then we chop up the activities in stage gates. So we know we don't know everything now, but we know what we want to have at the end of this first stage, so that we can say, okay, we open the gate for the next stage to be developed and money to be attributed to such a profile. So it's a conscious then process that you take together in the team to make these decisions and advance your R&D projects forward.
You told me the last time we spoke, if I remember correctly, you told me about a book that you read years ago that influenced your philosophies around managing chaos. What was that book? Remind me, what was that book?
It's On the Edge of Chaos. It's a classic, I guess, by now. Indeed, it's probably 30 years or 35 years old.
Was that was that Surfing on the Edge of Chaos, or was that a different book?
I think that's a different book.
That's
There
a
are many
different book.
books, of course. Yeah, in this, it was called On the Edge of Chaos. Maybe I can actually get it still out of my library here. It'll take a little bit of time
Oh, that's
to
okay.
get it. I was fascinated by complexity theory, which basically, describes how order appears from chaos. Or in business science, it's called system thinking. So just to give you an example, if you think of a flock of birds, right, and the behavior that it provides, it's very difficult, of course, to be deterministic about it because you can't say whether the flock of birds will go left or right at a certain moment in time. But what you can do is with 3 simple rules, describe the behavior that you're seeing, the patterns that are emerging. And these 3 simple rules are the following. Maintain a minimum distance from other birds to avoid collision. So you have to not come too close. Fly towards the average positions of your neighbors. So you don't want to go outside of the flock. And then fly in the average directions of your neighbor, which is also nice. If you put these 3 simple rules into a computer model, with dots, for example, you see a pattern of flocking behavior of birds. So I think in the end, this is also applicable in real life. We cannot control everything. We cannot determine the outcome of everything that we do or even other people are doing. But if you understand the overall system, I think you can find some general rules that you can apply to at least feel at a higher level in control of the patterns that you would like to see emerging, either in your organization or in your project. So it's being comfortable with uncertainty and at the same time trying to control that uncertainty by at least knowing the risks that you can know and then address them, and be comfortable with the risks that you don't know. The unknowns are just unknown. You have to adapt at the moment that they arise.
Yeah.
So being open to that and then recognize it and then act. So those are things that, I kind of liked, so that there's no, you have some level of control, but you don't have a lot of control, which allows personally me to deal with all the uncertainties that we have in biotech. So I want to do everything right that I can. And I'm okay with, chaotic behavior or events that I cannot control, like COVID-19. And then you adapt.
It's I need to read that book. I'm disappointed in myself that I haven't. As you were describing the bird example, I'm envisioning, I live on a small farm in Pennsylvania, and we have massive flocks of starlings, European starlings, here. They were introduced to the States, 150 years ago, and they've just proliferated here. And their murmurations, I'm envisioning that as you're talking. And you sit there and you marvel at it. How are they not colliding? They're playing by those rules that you just described, and they don't collide. They don't. They don't. If they bump each other, they correct very quickly. And continue their murmuration.
Isn't that nice? Huh?
But how much of that is learned versus inherent? Like, did Erik van den Berg bring that personality? Like the personality trait to be willing to embrace the imperfection that comes with chaos theory, and deal with it despite the consequences, because sometimes the stakes are pretty high. Did you come with that, or did you learn it?
No, I had to learn it. Yeah, I think earlier in life I probably wanted to control everything, and I'm sure that if we speak with my staff, they will still say that I exert quite a bit of oversight because I do like details, but I also like the higher level. So I think that's basically where it starts. But it was learned that it's okay not to control all little risks. We just need to be aware of the big risks, and those are the ones that you have to control. You have to put policies in place, or more importantly, preemptive work. Well, what if that happens? Well, then, it's good if we would have done this investment at this moment in time. So I think in the end, it's a couple of things that I learned along the way. And that is, of course, we need to endure constant change. There's lots of uncertainty, and you need to be comfortable with that, certainly in a biotech. You have to take decisions in the absence of full data, identifying these risks and addressing them early on.
Yeah.
And you can have an overall direction, like a vision, a strategy, development plan, a culture, company culture. So those things I think you can put in place. And with that, you're kind of managing these uncertainties and these chaotic behaviors towards a certain direction that you like. And then still, things will pop up and you have to deal with. But at least the stream is going in the right direction. And then within that stream, you will still need to navigate where your boat actually is going towards. So I think those are, higher level and so strategical and tactical things that you can separate them and then address them.
Yeah. All right. To wrap things up here, Erik, I'll give you another opportunity to share what's going on at Memo Therapeutics, but you have to do it in the context of the theme here of chaos. So what's the you got to be safe with you got to play this one safe. You don't want to make your public relations people upset. But what's the chaos that Erik van den Berg is engaged in today at Memo, and how are you navigating it?
Well, very interesting question. I guess the chaos that I'm introducing, at least at the beginning, is to have an impact on the culture of the company, where it's perfectly understandable that in an early phase of development, the company is even more cash restricted, which means that going fast is maybe the first priority, and now the chaos of doing it right in the way to shorten the further development steps that we need to take. So still the overall objective is the same, which is get a drug to market in the fastest way possible. But the approach is different. Instead of moving as quickly as possible to the next milestone, it is making sure that when we reach the next milestone, we have everything we need, at least that we can now think of, that puts us in the best position to make sure that we have the fastest plan forward thereafter to the market. Which is, it sounds like a trivial change, but I think it's quite a profound change. At least that's the feedback that I got. And which, the team, it's a very agile team. It's very happy to work with, because in the end, we want to be successful, right? And we want to address this unmet medical need. And that's basically, I guess, the chaos that we're currently addressing. Lots is under control, and that's good. Mm-hmm. Like to keep it that way, and focusing on quality of the deliverables is a key aspect, I think, in that whole story. Yeah,
very good. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, Erik. I appreciate you coming on the show. A lot of great insight there, and your track record speaks for itself. But it's always good to have a conversation like what's behind this guy that's got this track record. What's between his ears that keeps him on track. And I think you were very transparent and insightful with what you shared with us today. So I appreciate it.
Well, it was my pleasure, Matt, to participate. Thanks for all your questions. And I'm sure we would have another hour to talk about more aspects. But let's
at least.
Poor listeners, indeed. Let's give them a break.
No, they love it. They love it. They tell me they love it all the time. And we could spend another hour. I'll be in touch to schedule that next hour. We'll have you back on the show the next opportunity you can give us.
Oh, well, thanks, Matt. Looking forward to that then.
Thank you. So that's Memo Therapeutics CEO Erik van den Berg. I'm Matt Pillar, and you just listened to the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Life Science Connect, and we represent the entire community of learning, solving, and sourcing resources for biotech builders that you'll find in that community, including Bioprocess Online, Cell and Gene, Advancing RNA, Clinical Leader, Life Science Leader, Outsource Pharma, and a whole lot more. If you like listening to the Business of Biotech, you might like watching it even more. Go to the Listen and Watching tab at bioprocessonline.com and check that out. We drop every Monday. We'll see you then. And in the meantime, thanks for listening.